at how to be able to have friends, fans, and followers for a lifetime, to be able to craft compelling messages that engages people, that makes them excited to be able to follow you on your journey so that you can serve them through your products, through your programs, through the different ways that you're able to serve them. There is something that I heard recently, and it really shifted my understanding about this. Is, first of all, the way one of the ways to attract people into being interested in what you're doing is through a concept that is called an attractive character. And an attractive character is basically it's a personality. It's based on this concept that people are more attracted to people, they connect with people, than they are to faceless corporations. That in this economy that we're in today, the rules that used to work in the past with these big brands and these big names and these corporations, the previous generations were fine with these faceless corporations. But today, if you want to thrive in reaching the people you're called to reach, then there's going to be a need to be able to put some personality in your presentation, to be able to connect with people on a personal level, not just a faceless brand or a boring brand. And part of the way that you do that is through having attractive character. How would you like to be able to attract clients, customers, students, donors, people who you are called to serve, that they're coming to you in groves, compared to if you're out there chasing or looking or trying to chase for people? That is a lot more difficult. And in this concept, it allows you to have a character that attracts your dream who, the person that it would be a dream for you to work with, that you're able to attract them through this concept that I'm going to be sharing with you today. One of the things that really got me excited about this was I was listening to a training by Dan Kennedy, and he was explaining how the reason why people are going to stick with you for long term, the people that are going to he says it is not great, it's not excellent content that will make people stick with you for 20, 30, 40 years. It is having a connection with your character, with you as an individual. People are going to connect with you for the long haul. And he explained how everything that I talk about, it's really like 20, 30 things. Like I could list out all 20 to 30 topics that I cover, the only things that I talk about. But the reason why you're still here, and some of you, he had people stand up in the room. He's like, some of you, how many have been here for 10 years, 20 years with me? And how many people have paid $10,000, $30,000, $50,000, over $100,000 on my programs? And people were like still standing. And he was showing that what causes people to pay more and what causes people to pay longer is their relationship with you as an individual. And I was thinking, I'm like, wow, that's really fascinating, because it's so true. I started thinking about, and maybe you can think about, who is an influencer, who is someone that you enjoy listening to, you enjoy watching, and you find that they really only talk about a lot of the same subjects. And maybe there's someone whose career that you may or may not follow, but you're at least aware. There are some people I'm aware of who've been teaching for 40 plus years, but they only talk about like 40 topics or 40 concepts. And I'm like, wow, so it's not the content. It's not great content that keeps people with them. It truly is their personality. It's that perpetuates the preference. And that preference makes someone say, out of all the options that exist online, why would someone want to stick with you and listen to your message or work with you and join your program as opposed to other people and other options? It's their relationship. I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. So he was explaining how a compelling character is one that needs to be crafted. It's something that's done intentionally. It's by design. Because without this, you're going to have a boring business. You're going to have, it's not the faceless firms that people like. It's or these connectionless companies. These are, you need to have a connection with the people that you seek to serve. And it's powerful because one of the objections, one of the concerns that often happens with this is, one of the early concerns I had is like, well, I don't really want to put my like face on camera or like taking photos, or maybe like all this photo taking stuff is just selfish, like they're called selfies, or recording videos, like maybe I could hide behind audio or do texting or something, or writing or something. But what I began to realize that really helped me to not feel like I was just like drawing. It's like, I don't want to draw a bunch of attention to myself. I want to draw attention to Christ. I want to draw attention to, maybe it's like my offers or what I have to offer. But it wasn't until I began to realize, well, in reality, first of all, 1 Corinthians 11:1, Paul says, follow me, be ye followers of me, even as I follow Christ. So God would have us to have followers, but we are to encourage people to follow us as we follow Christ, because there's a way that seems right to a man, but the end thereof are the way of death. And if the blind lead the blind, they both end up in where? In a ditch. Exactly. So by following, what's powerful is I begin to realize that it's not people who are following you as an individual. It is Christ who is, in Haggai 2:7, Christ is the desire of nations. And when people who want something better, they desire Christ. But 1 Corinthians 1:27 says it's Christ in you, the hope of glory. So really it's Christ in you, who is the desire of nations, that makes your character attractive, because it's Christ's character being shown. It's the caring character. People have to believe that you care about them for them to want to follow, for them to want to listen. And when you make a distinction that it's not really just me, but it's actually Christ in me that people are interested in, then you begin to realize, like, this makes a lot of sense. I want to. So when people come in contact with you, they're able to come in contact with the representative of Christ, and they're attracted to the desire of nations. So then you have this attractive character. Does that make sense? So with that, like an example is, in order to do that, we have to be very aware. We have to become conscious about what are the elements that I have. And this is where a lot of people want to be kind of hiding. They just talk about their business, they just talk about their ministry, they just talk about what they do, but they don't really talk about who they are or what they stand for. It's important to take a stand. It's important to share pieces of your past or parts of your testimony, because that's how people connect with you as an individual. And one of the reasons why nobody listens, or why entrepreneurs struggle with getting people's attention, is because they're boring, and they're not talking about things that people are able to relate to personally. They're only talking about theories or concepts, or not really personal things. And some people are like, no, I just want to be strictly professional, not personal. But while that may work in the corporate world, that doesn't really work in the real world as far as entrepreneurship, where most of you are in connecting with people on social media and online. People want personal testimonies, personal presentations, personal connection and conversations, especially while we have been in this world that is so socially distanced. People are looking for that connection, and we can be virtually connected. So one thing that I remember that I went through in seeking to be who God has called me to be, I was attending this event, Steve Larson. It was this Offer Mind, and in 2021, it was May. I'll never forget. As I was there's a speaker, and she was doing a talk on authenticity and attachment. There's these two needs that everybody has, and she mentioned how whenever someone will sacrifice their authenticity, like who they really are, in order to meet their need of attachment with a parent or a teacher or someone, when they have to choose between the two, then almost always they will choose to sacrifice authenticity in order for them to be accepted, in order for them to feel connected and attached to those they care about. And that, she said, the doctor she was quoting was saying, is the definition of trauma. trauma isn't something that happens to us. Trauma is something that happens in between the eyes. It's in the mind. And then she was just showing these different examples. How sometimes you have a dream, but like your piano teacher said, that you have to do it this way, this specific way, and then you have to like compromise your character, who you believe that you are, or something you enjoy, in order to have the approval or acceptance of a teacher. It could be just about anyone, or an older sibling that you respect. And she was explaining that. I'm like, wow, that's really fascinating. And while I was sitting at this event, she asked a question like, who do you believe you authentically are? Who that you haven't been allowing yourself to be like publicly or openly? And I felt like I got punched in the stomach, because I was like, oh, I'm like, Lord, is that true? Could it really be? And I was like, no, not that. And I began to realize that at that moment, I started praying for the next remainder days of the event. And I began to realize, like, me authentically at my core, I am an entrepreneur. I always have been. And I've been an entrepreneur since I was 10 years old when I started selling, and I've always done those things. And yet for videos and the types of content that I would publish and create was largely just kind of like speaking from like poor missionary like background, or speaking to that kind of people. And part of the reason why I did that is because I had poor missionary mentors that they put some stigma on business. They put stigmas on entrepreneurship, on selling, on like all of these limiting beliefs that honestly is not a part of what I believe. But in order to kind of like fit in or to thrive in that ministry environment, then it's like I had to go along to kind of get along in that regard. That was several years ago as a teenager, and I'm trying to figure out what the Bible's saying and all these things. But as I've been studying, I'm beginning to realize, wait a second, Christ was an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurial is a biblical principle all throughout the Old and New Testament. And I've had these strong, liberating truths and these beliefs about entrepreneurship. I study entrepreneurship, and I teach business based on biblical principles. I teach practical lessons based on biblical principles. And I found that like there's several people in my audience who love the practical lessons that I share. And they're like, this is so great. I love this. But if I were to speak about business, they'd be like, shh, no. But they don't realize that a lot of these lessons that I'm learning in the context of an entrepreneurship or business training. And I'm tracing through the scriptures. I'm filtering through God's word and saying, hey, either I'm learning from the Bible or I'm learning from science and the science of entrepreneurship, and filtering through the scriptures and then presenting based on biblical principles. And like people make that disconnect. I'm like, man, I'm actually stealing from the people a great source, a great experience that if they don't see themselves as entrepreneurs, it's going to be a lot harder to serve people who don't think like entrepreneurs. And who is an entrepreneur? I define as one who finds and solves a valuable problem. And if people don't see themselves as problem solvers, then it's going to be really hard to share messages with them that will lead them to thrive and succeed in their calling, because in order to succeed, we have to be problem solvers. And so I began to realize that's an area that I have to be authentic, that is an area for me to speak out. And I remember coming back to the team, I'm like, guys, I have a confession to make. And they're like, what? It's like, I learned something really powerful. I was at the event. And they're like, okay, what is it? I'm like, I'm an entrepreneur. And I remember they were like, well, yeah, duh, we already knew that. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. I have not been publishing or sharing and speaking to entrepreneurs to the degree that really I am. And they're like, we hear you talk about it sometimes. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, just wait, things are going to be different. And then after months, a few months in, it's like, I remember having a conversation with one of my students. They're like, whoa, I knew you liked entrepreneurship, but I had no idea you liked it that much. I had no idea you were that involved. I don't even remember like watching you study or learn, or how you do that, and like realizing that for the last like several years have been just deep into studying and learning and applying, and I've been building businesses for over 10 years, and after. And then, and so that was a shock. And they're like, I didn't know you had these beliefs about sales. I didn't know you had these Bible beliefs about business, about entrepreneurship. Like and it was just life transforming, about money, about finances. And it's like, I realized that as long as I was a poor missionary, then it's like, you can't go from being like a poor missionary living in your car to being able to have a family business. It's making 6 figures a year in passive residual income without addressing the beliefs that you have about finances, about business, about sales. Like, these are skills that these are beliefs that you have to address if you're going to thrive. And I realized that it's just, business has been such a gift and a blessing in my life that because our monthly expenses equal our passive income, that we don't have to trade time for labor, we don't have to go work for. It's like, I get to do what I love, I get to do what I believe I'm called to do. Then it's like, that gift is something so special that I want to give to the world. And I realize I'm like surrounded by poor missionaries or people who are trying to serve God, but they lack resources. And like, here, it's like, we have abundance of resources that are coming, that we wake up and all of our monthly expenses are covered, regardless. And then it's just like, I just see this contrast. I'm like, man, it's time where I have to teach some of the business lessons that I've learned that have helped our family business to grow, to be able to create this life of our dreams, this life to live and serve and contribute in ways that I could never do as a poor missionary with limiting beliefs about what the Bible says about finances, sales, and business. So it was this journey to be more authentic and speaking to entrepreneurs. Like, this is what I love. I love talking to entrepreneurs. I love talking to people who want to solve problems, who want to serve, who want to use their mouth to speak messages that move the multitudes. And I want to help you to get your message out to the masses. So using social media, and this is what is exciting. So I'm going to share with you, 3 big ideas as far as this crafting a compelling character and how to do this. First of all, the first big idea I would recommend is you want to prepare your pouch of parables. This is an exercise that is done again and again. You want to have a pouch of parables or a bag of backstories, or you want to be able to organize your origin stories so that you're able to always be ready to give an answer, always be ready to share your themes and concepts in with these parables. And I'd say that every attractive character has a pouch of parables. Now you say, like, what do you mean by that? Well, just look at, when you look at the Bible, you look at the greatest speaker that this world has ever known, the greatest communicator, the greatest teacher in human history was Christ. And how did Christ teach? When Jesus spoke to the multitude, there's only one tool that he used. And if we could look at Matthew 13:34, it shows that all things spake Jesus unto the multitude in parables, and without a parable spake he not unto them. So it is so clear. Like, when Jesus spoke to the multitudes, when the masses, if you have a message to go to the multitudes, to move the masses, then the greatest teacher that ever walked the earth knew that you need parables. You need to be able to wrap your statements into stories. Wrap your truths into testimonies. These are going to have the greatest effect. Why? Why would it be good for you to have a pouch of parables or a stack of stories or a list, an inventory of personalized stories that you can use to teach and illustrate your lessons? Because number one, parables arrest attention. Parables arrest attention, where when you are speaking, when you tell a story, instantly people tune in. If I say, let me tell you a story, you're like, oh yeah, I want to hear a story. I mean, this is what we do. Like, what are we doing when we're sitting around the campfire telling stories? What about when we're talking on the phone and we're calling our close friends? We're telling stories. What about when we haven't seen each other for a long time? We're like, hey, how have you been? What's new? We're telling stories. We filter the world through the lens of story. It's through the story that persuades our perception. So when we are seeking to understand and connect with people, we're like, where are you from? What's your childhood? Like, where did you where'd you come from? What's your background? Like, tell me what's your experience with this. People want to know about stories. Yes, see the comments, stories connect people. So, and they arrest attention. So the moment you speak in parables, use parables to preach or to present, then people are paying closer attention. But when you're just giving facts and details and dates and all this stuff, it's harder to arrest the attention of the multitude, because there's so many different types of people in the masses that are coming from different backgrounds. So the second reason why present in parables is because parables penetrate people's hearts. Parables penetrate people's hearts. And what I mean by that is all learning is state dependence. I learned this from Jim Quick, my brain coach. He mentioned that all learning is state dependent. So like emotion plus information equals long-term memory. If you are just speaking dry information that's emotionless explanations, then it doesn't stick. It doesn't resonate or it doesn't connect. So what you do is like, how can you attach or emotion with the facts that you're sharing? The feelings and the facts, they both need to be present, because what will happen is you're able to, the answer is through stories. Stories is the secret to move people emotionally. And when you could move them emotionally, then it is emotion that your brain, the human mind, uses to attach to information to store in the long-term memory. We are not just logical beings. We are emotional beings. So when you could reach both the emotion and the logic, and you combine these together, then people start to retain the things that you are sharing. Some of you may be wondering, you've seen my finger here. It's all wrapped up in a bandage. The reason why is because earlier this week I was cutting some bread with my brother Kamran, and as we were making some of these plant-based grilled cheese sandwiches, we had this like Russian black bread, and I got to the end. I was just getting this bread knife, and it got to the end and then slipped and slid and just kind of cut like this C shape out of my finger or into my finger, and it probably went like a quarter of an inch in. It was pretty deep, but it wasn't straight on, otherwise I would hit my bone. It was kind of slicing at an angle, so it was like this C shape where it was like a flap that would have died off. But I remember, I'm like, hey, my mom cut her finger several years ago like a C shape. She's like, I'm gonna lose a big chunk of my finger. And I'm like, no, hold on, Mom. And I went outside. She lived in the country, and I jumped over her fence, and then I grabbed like this, grabbed some pitch off of the pine tree. I brought it in. I'm like, here, Mom, put this on there. Like, what are you doing? It's like this. When a tree gets cut or damaged, what happens? It starts to ooze pitch, and that's what it uses to heal. So if you take the healing properties from the pine pitch or Douglas fir pitch and you put it on your wound, then it starts to heal. She's like, okay, well, I trust you. And we put it on there and wrapped it all up. And within a few days, it was gone. She thought she was going to lose her finger, but it actually bound it back together. And she barely even has any scar now. And she's like, this is a miracle from God. And it's like, yeah, Jesus used the clay to heal the blind man. God uses, I believe, some natural remedies to bring about some powerful restoration. So that's why I got my finger here. It's almost fully healed, and it's amazing. I haven't lost any of the flesh or the skin, and it's all good. So if you see my finger, don't let it distract you. it is what it is. Just a flesh wound, this too will pass. Don't worry. And so we're talking about packaging your principles in parables. That's what you want to do. If you got a principle, you want to package it in a parable. How do you do that? Well, you use the 3 S's for storytelling. Write this down, the 3 S's for storytelling. Number 1 is you want to use you want to create a snapshot in their mind. Snapshot, story, statement, in that order. And I'll break it down. Snapshot. Why snapshot, story, statement? Why a snapshot? Because you want to be able to paint a picture in the person's mind. And that snapshot might be used by a visual aid. Some people want to write it on a board. Some people want to use slides. You find that I often have visual aids on slides that are relevant to the subject I'm talking about. And then sometimes, and then if you're on Clubhouse, if you're on radio, if you're on podcast or some audio medium to communicate, then you can use what are called word pictures, where you're able to paint a picture using your words. So instead of saying that what I'm about to teach you is going to blow your mind, you could say your mind is going to be going off like fireworks and be doing jumping jacks after I explain to you this truth. And it's like, you see how there's a different picture that is painted in your mind just by talking about jumping jacks and fireworks. So you're like, oh, that's what my brain's going to do? I got it. So you can use vocal pictures to use your you could vocalize the vision in people's mind, these visual aids. So S is snapshot, the first S. So you want to be able to paint that picture. And once they're thinking of a picture, pictures create emotion, pictures invoke the memory, so they're able to remember and retain and recall the things that you're learning. So it's good to paint a picture. So snapshot, and then you tell your story. Once you have the picture, then you tell your parable, you tell your story of what you're saying, and you're letting them know, ideally you want to share a story that they could see themselves in, that they could resonate with, that they could relate to. Because again, stories arrest attention. And as they're going through the stories, you want to identify their old belief that's preventing them from, whether it's buying your offer, joining your program, working with you, doing whatever the behavior is. Identify that belief, uninstall that belief with the story, and then reinstall a new belief, a liberating truth with your story. And as you're going through, then it starts to transform people's characters. And then third, you want to end with your statements. This is when you're able to say these clear-cutting statements that are just like, wow, and it makes so much more powerful because the story creates the emotional state that allows them to have an epiphany that they are able to really like to receive the statements that you have. It's after the testimony that the truths really stand out. So I'll give you an example. Jesus did this in teaching about the Good Samaritan. In the Good Samaritan, the guy gets sick. He said a certain man on his way to Jericho fell among thieves, and they stripped him of his raiment, and they left him basically for dead. And you get this picture of this guy who just got jumped, he's got beat up, and he's got wounds. And then he talks about these people, they go by, and they like this Levite and the priest, they walk by and they just don't do anything, like busy, got some meetings I gotta go attend to. So he takes off. And then finally the Samaritan, he comes and he binds up and nullifies and he adds oil to his ointments. Again, you see the use of natural remedies and how he's putting these together, and he puts him on his ride, and he takes him into the tavern, and he pays for his food, pays for his night, and he takes care of him. And then Jesus ends the parable and he says, okay, so let me ask you, who is that man's neighbor? And then people were like, well, clearly it was a Samaritan. And it says, go and do thou likewise. Because before that, the Pharisees that he was speaking to, they were very proud, and then they were trying to catch Jesus, and Christ was like, gotta love your neighbor as yourself, and love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And they're like, oh, love your neighbor. Like that starts pricking the heart. That it's easy to want to reject that statement. So they're like, yeah, who is my neighbor? And they're trying to find this loophole to avoid, to say like, that doesn't apply to me. And then he painted a snapshot. He told a story, and he ended with a statement, who is that man's neighbor? And they're like, the Samaritan, who, by the way, the Jews hated. The Jews had no dealings with the Samaritans. And then Jesus said, go and do thou likewise. That statement, he brought the truth home, where now it's irrefutable. Now they just express, and they're like, oh, that's who I have to love, the Samaritans. I gotta love my neighbor means neighbor. It doesn't mean like my religion or my nation. Oh, that's a hard saying. That's a polarizing belief, and we're going to get to that. So remember, when you're telling stories, practice presenting using the 3 S's of storytelling. When you follow these 3 S's, it is going to dramatically improve your ability to persuade, the power that you'll speak, and people will start to connect with you so much more. If you wrap your stories, you package your principles and parables. There was a long time where I just used to say a lot of statements. I didn't give examples. I didn't tell stories, and people weren't getting it. It's hard to pay attention. But once you start telling stories, and then they stick. They remember. Many times they remember the story and they can communicate it to someone else, because stories are easier to remember than statements. Other times they just remember. They forgot what you said, but they remember how you made them feel. And they remember the statement that came with that feeling, the facts with that feelings, and that really made a difference. So the third reason why to use parables is because parables perpetuate principles, and it goes along with what we're talking about. Parables perpetuate principles, because here's the truth: parables perpetuate, stories stick, but facts fade. Facts fade, stories stick. It's really that simple. When you just teach facts, they don't remember it. When you teach stories, it sticks. It rivets it in the mind. It makes it for unforgettable. How many of you would like your message, your messages to be unforgettable in the lives that you are called to reach and to touch?
Yes.
Absolutely. So it's by mastering the skill of storytelling. Because truth be told, storytelling is story selling. Your facts tell, stories sell. So if you want to sell someone or change their perception, help them to see the value in your idea, your program, your product, your offer, your whatever it is, it's stories that are going to help change people's beliefs, to help them to say yes to you more often. Learning how to tell stories that they can identify with and now shift the direction of where they're going. Which brings to number 4. The 4th reason to use parables is because parables persuade perspectives. Parables persuade perspectives. This is so key. All selling is persuasion. All selling, if you have a program, if you have a product, if you have something, a vision, you have to learn how to persuade others to see value in your vision. And when people buy, it's because they're perceiving that what you have to offer is more value in their perception than the dollars that they have and the time that they have, because they might exchange with their time. They might dedicate their time. They might exchange their dollars. Whatever it is, you have to be able to persuade their perspective to see the value in what that is. And it's through parables, it's through stories that allow you to do that. That's what changes people's behaviors. And then the 5th reason is that parables transform personalities. Parables transform character. And in Hebrews 8:10, God says He wants to write His laws. That's His truth, His message, His word. He wants to write His laws on our hearts and on our minds. Now, the heart is your emotions. The mind is your thoughts. These are the logical. This is the thoughts and the feelings combined make up the moral character. So if you want to change people's characters, if you want to influence people's characters and help them through eternity, then get very good at telling stories and presenting in parables, because this is what's going to transform people's character. Why is that important? Because really, the only thing that we're going to be able to take with us to heaven and throughout eternity is our character and the character of those we influenced through our parables, through our communication. Because the reward, the storing, amassing treasures in heaven, that's really the characters that you've influenced. It's the people, the precious, the pearls of great price that you were able to influence and lead to be there for eternity. So by learning how to change character, by changing is by presenting in parables. Stories are able to really make that big difference. So these are 5 reasons to use parables that will, when you start using these parables, like really get a pouch of parables, make personal parables, tell personal stories of your experience, of what you've gone through, because people will connect with you based on your past and what they can, the shared values, the shared experiences. And it's fascinating because I began to realize that in studying about this crafting a compelling character as an entrepreneur and being authentic, I began to realize everything that I've ever done to connect with someone one-on-one or in person, either intentionally or unintentionally, I did. And this framework that I'm sharing with you is simply is really like a step-by-step of how. It's like the explaining of why behind why it works, that what I did intentionally, unintentionally connect with people. Like for instance, when you meet someone for the first time, what are some of the early things you want to know? They want to know, it's like, okay, who are you? Like, how many brothers do you have? Where were you born? Where are you from? Are you from this country? Are you from, people say like, I'm from Georgia. I'm like, whoa, I was born in Georgia. And then people are like, oh, I lived in North Carolina. I'm like, my mom was born in North Carolina. We got this common ground. It's so interesting. Or whatever it is, because people like those who are like what? Themselves. So by you being able to communicate common ground, that's what builds trust. And the difference is that works one-on-one. I'm showing you how to do this one-to-many. Through video, through presentation, through stages, through platforms, through podcasts, through whatever it is. You're able to, the same things that connect you with people one-on-one or in person is what's able to connect you with audience, to move the masses, to move the multitudes. And so I would suggest to you that you start inserting some personal experiences. Show how the truths that you're teaching have actually transformed your testimony and has changed who you are, and people will connect with you. Too often we present this facade, or we present like that, like all of our successes, and we think that we can't thrive as an attractive character, we can't thrive as an entrepreneur because like I don't have this great success, or I don't have anything that's so different than other people. But really, the more distant you are, the less influence you have. The more like the person you want to serve, the more influence you will have, and the more they'll want to follow you to help, so that you can help them to show the way. And part of the ways that we do this is the third part. The first is I talked about why craft a compelling character. The second is why to prepare your pouch of parables. This is what we just talked about. The third that I'm going to share is to talk about your failures. Talk about your failures. This is so important if you're going to connect with people on a personal level, because people, the truth is, like, there's a leadership podcast that I've listened to for hours and hours. I really enjoy it. And it's by Craig Rochelle. And there's a phrase that he always says. He ends every podcast with this leadership podcast with a phrase that people would rather follow a leader that's always real than a leader that's always right. Too often we try to position ourselves as being right, having the right answers, having done the right decisions, having done in the right place at the right time, and just Mr. Right. And if I did something wrong, we're just so like terrified. We're so like, oh no, this is awful. This is the worst thing that can happen. But it's not, because it is. Did you know it's actually your failures that people connect with more than your successes? That people will connect with you more on your pain than they will, their shared common pain, than they will on your great pleasure and all, if you just present all these bubbly, cheerful, all this great things, oh, my life is a bed of roses and it's just so wonderful and nothing ever goes wrong, then people are like, oh yeah, that's them. Like Enoch can do that because he's Enoch, but I'm an actual person. Like I go through struggles, I have difficulties. It's like, and then you actually distance yourself from the people you're seeking to serve. So what you need to do is reveal some of your pain. And what I would suggest is to share scars, not wounds. Meaning, when you share your pain, share the pain that you've gained victory over, that you've processed, or things that are in the past. Not necessarily the things that you're going through right now might be a little more difficult when you haven't come to conclusions, when you haven't found closure, when you haven't really found some things that can be helpful. Start sharing some of the pains of your past and people will connect. So many times we think that my failures disqualifies me to serve. And actually there's a purpose for your pain. Psalms 119 verse 71 says, "It is good for me that I've been afflicted." What? Why? That I might learn thy statutes. Rather than just sharing statutes and statements of what you've learned, share the story of your pain, your affliction that led to those statements. And before you share your story, create a snapshot. Create a snapshot, a visual, so that they can follow your story and come to the same statutes and statements and conclusions that you came to. The 3 S's of storytelling. So these stories are so important. Like for me, another example, some of you may or may not know, for me, I had 16 failed business attempts before starting a business that succeeded. Before getting to the business that our family has now, that is able to help to cover our monthly expenses passively. I've tried 16 different business models, different businesses, trying different ways to start in this entrepreneurial journey, and they all failed. And it's and some of them I was a poor missionary still trying to do these businesses. I had the mind of a poor missionary, but I had a heart of an entrepreneur. So I'm starting these businesses with the beliefs that are just terrible about business. And so as I'm working on some of these things, I'm gaining experiences. I'm gaining, learning how to lead people, learning how to lead teams. But financially, things weren't going very well because I was missing the connection of what needs to take place in businesses. So, when I tell you that I failed 16 times before finding something that was successful, does that make you feel that's oh, I don't want anything to do with him? Or does that make you feel whoa, you've gone through 16, I've gone through all of these. Maybe you're on your 3rd try, maybe you're on your 5th try, maybe you're on your 1st try. But a lot of times, and maybe you're on your 16th try, a lot of times people hear this and they're just wow. It's I can relate. That makes sense. Because a lot of times you only hear about these stories and the media, they absolutely love. People love hearing about an overnight success. They love hearing about someone who is just they woke up having no skill, no prior background, no forewarning, and they just stumped onto this level 10 opportunity, and boom, they're a great success. They just came out of nowhere. It's $3 million in 30 minutes. You're what? And then that's what gets people's attention. But here's the secret. Behind every overnight success, they are 12 years in the making of trial and error and failure and falling forward and learning and getting back up, refusing to be disappointed, though met with disappointment and delay, and then boom, finally, the 16th business, something takes off, and then boom, now you hear. And you're they came almost out of nowhere. But that's because they have been struggling in the dark. They've been putting in the work. They've been doing the disagreeable duties and going at it in silence. And nobody cared what they were doing until they had some level of success. But I want you to see that the failures help you connect with people. People don't care about your success until they connect with you on your failures. I'll give you an example. So recently during family worship, I went around the table with my family, and I was just asking them, I asked everybody, who is someone that you really admire in the scriptures and why? And as I asked each person in the family who wanted to share who's someone you really admire, one person it was interesting. My mom, she was saying that she really is inspired by David. I knew she was going to say that because he is a man after God's own heart. He served the Lord, and God called him a friend of God. And God loved him, even though he did bad things as we do. And she's like, that's encouraging to me. And I asked, like, what would you say is your favorite failure of David? And she's like, well, I really like how he had like adultery with Bathsheba. He had a child, but then he lost his child. And yet, even though he lost his child, God gave David Solomon. Solomon was like the Solomon in the scriptures, and he was infinitely blessed, and he repented. He like wrote Psalms 51, beautiful prayer of repentance, and God received him, and now like he's going to be in the kingdom. And she's like, I love that redemption story. I'm like, okay, makes sense. And then we got to Shanicia, and Shanicia was saying like, well, I really like Paul and I like Peter because Paul was dead wrong in one direction, and then he was completely in the other direction and serving God. And Peter was really zealous, and yet he was so human. He wanted to stand up for God, and sometimes like his method was totally not like God's method. It was different, but God was able to refine Peter. God was able to change Paul, and Peter reminds me of how I am, how I want to grow and I want to learn. And sometimes I don't have all of the right answers, but I want to do the right thing, and I'm willing to be corrected. I'm willing to change and pivot my plans as I have new information. I make a new decision, but it's just they're gung-ho. They're all in when they're doing something, and I'm like, yeah, I can relate to that too. I'm the type of guy that's just like, I get intense when I do things. I go all in, full force, all gas, no brakes kind of guy. I'm like, I don't just dip my toe in the water. I cannonball in and then figure out how, what to go do from there. And I asked her, like, what do you see as your favorite failure of Peter? And Shanisi's like, well, it was when he chopped off the ear, and then Jesus came over and healed him. He was ready to take action, but he was not really aware that like it wasn't the best something, but it was still something. And then he learned better. And then later he became the president of the New Testament church. Like, God used a man like that who was so impetuous as Peter, but he was able to be converted and used by God. And it's inspiring to her. I'm like, okay, cool. And then I asked someone else, I'm like, what is your favorite? And then Katharina was sharing how she was really inspired by Moses because of his leadership ability, and how he had to lead this whole Israelite nation, over 1 million people. He had everything on his shoulders, and then Jethro was like, look, you don't have to do that. You're gonna work yourself into the grave. But Moses did the best according to his ability. And when Jethro gave him new information, he made a new decision, and then he changed. And I asked him, like, what would you say is your favorite failure of Moses? And she continued, she's like, I really like how when he was speaking to God at the burning bush, he was like, I cannot speak. I'm not an eloquent speaker. And God was like, look, I'm going to give you the words to say. I'll even give you Aaron, your brother. And I was like, why does that inspire you? And she was explaining how, she revealed how, because I struggle sometimes with speaking. I want to speak more, but I often feel like I stumble a lot. And those things that Moses went through, I could really relate. And yet Moses ended up speaking to Pharaoh. He didn't even use his brother, and he was a powerful instrument in God's hands, even though Moses had limiting beliefs like us about his speaking. How many of you guys feel like you want to speak, you want to share personal stories, but maybe you feel like, I'm not really eloquent, why would people want to listen to me? Or like you could relate to the story of Moses, right? Absolutely, I can too. And yet we serve a God who's able to turn every failure into victory. And what I pointed out during this family worship is basically that, isn't it interesting how the character that inspires the individual the most is the one who they connect with most on their failures, on their pain, on the problems of their past. That connection is what allows them to be inspired by their success. Otherwise, there's a lot of successful people in the scriptures. There's a lot of prosperous people of God, but their prosperity doesn't excite us until we connect with their pain first. Isn't that interesting? And then I got a message from, because we have family worship online and people can join us on Zoom from all around the world, and someone else who was joining live, she messaged me later and she's like, you know what? I really like the story of Mary Magdalene. And I was like, why is that? Because she was promiscuous, because she was struggling with her children. I mean, with her life in that regard, and yet God healed her. God removed the demons. God was able to use her, and she gave the alabaster box to Christ, and God really connected with her and redeemed her and saved her and had mercy upon her. And she's like, and I just recently lost my baby. She had lost her baby a few months ago, and it was like out of wedlock. And she's like, I'm still trying to find myself, and I want to be whole in Christ and have that connection and forgiveness. And she's like, that really inspires me. I'm like, over and over again. And I would encourage you, let me know in the comments, who is someone who inspires you the most in the scriptures? And I'm curious to know, what is your favorite failure and why? Because this is just a very interesting fact. Now, the same thing applies in your business. When you can share the failures of your business, then people are interested in hearing your successes. But if you only share success, you have a tendency of distancing yourself away from those you want to hear. And if you want to have customers for life, if you want to have friends, fans, followers forever, then you're going to have to cultivate and craft, like intentionally design this compelling character, this attractive character that will make it's not your content that will keep people with you. It is your character. It's the personality who people can connect with. But if you do not disclose or share personal struggles, personal pain, personal parables and stories, if you don't share these personal ideals or beliefs or goals, then people don't know how to connect with you. You're not giving them, you're making it hard for people who want to connect. They want to be inspired, and you make it hard for them to do that. And if they're not inspired by you, if they're not fascinated with what you're doing, then they will not prefer you over all the other things that are grasping for their attention. So when you do that, it'll make a big difference. And then even Jesus, like, how many of us who follow Jesus would be interested in following Christ if it had not been for him taking on humanity, where he took on human nature? He was born in a manger. He showed his vulnerability. Even though Jesus was perfect, he took on the weakness of humanity. And the scripture says in Hebrews 2 that he was tempted in all points as we, yet without sin, that he himself has suffered to be tempted. So it's the sufferings of Christ. It's that he was a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Like, he knows what it means to grieve. He knows what it means to be betrayed by his best friend, by his close friend who he trusts. And like, how many of us have been betrayed by friends who we trusted or people that we trusted? And Jesus identifies with our pain and with our weakness of humanity. And it's because of that pain, that is what unites us and makes us care about his success and about who he is and what he stands for, what his mission is. In like manner with you, as you start getting comfortable expressing your pain, expressing your scars, not your wounds, you're sharing your story. The 3 S's of storytelling, people will care about what you have. They'll care about who you are. So that's the third part, is to talk about your failures. Do that more and you will have greater connection with others. The final point that I want to share is when you speak, be polarizing. Be polarizing. Now, what do I mean by that? Polarity, or to speak polarizing words, it's using words that convey a very strong opinion on a topic. Sometimes it might be extreme, but it's something you believe. And instead of trying to hold those things back, be polarizing. Speak the truth and let the classes, the two classes be created. And Jesus did this so many times. See, the definition of marketing, like one of the best definitions of marketing I've found, is you're attracting those who you want while repelling those who you're unable to serve. You're not best to serve. Jesus puts it this way. It's like, well, didn't Jesus come for everybody? No, he did not come for everybody. Jesus clearly said, I came not to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Jesus is like, look, I'm going to repel the self-righteous, and I'm going to attract the sinners who see their need of a Savior. He's like, the sick need a physician. They that are whole need not a physician. He's like, how can I help people that don't even see their need? It's a prerequisite to finding the gift and grace of God. So Jesus is coming to seek and save that which is lost. He leaves the 99 and he goes after that one lost sheep, the smallest number that can be numbered. So Christ was very polarizing in his statements. If you're not polarizing, you're going to be boring. Why do we want to polarize? Because if you're not polarizing, you're boring, and people don't want to listen to boring people. There's so many things to grasp for your attention, and businesses that are boring go bankrupt. So don't be boring, be polarizing. And when you are polarizing, this is what's going to happen. People who make the worst customers for you, who make the worst students, who are going to be complaining constantly, who are going to be causing a lot of issues, making a lot of support issues, and just they're not a good fit for you. You're going to attract both parties, and they're making a lot of commotion and a lot of drain on resources. You're going to attract them, and you're going to attract people that you are called to serve, who are great, who are a pleasure, who are great to work with. But a lot of your time, energy, money, focus, resources, manpower is going to go towards serving people who are just not the best fit, as opposed to identifying who is the dream. Who is your dream who it would be a dream to work with. It would just be absolutely great. You could serve them at the highest level. You can help them to succeed quicker, faster, bigger, and then like attract them. What are the statements that will attract them and repel others? Jesus did it in many ways. In Matthew chapter 10, Jesus said, think not that I come to bring peace. I come not to bring peace, but a sword, to put at variance the father-in-law and the mother-in-law. So he's like, his message was dividing. It creates two camps. In Matthew 25, he taught a parable. He said, look, the sheep on the right, the goats on the left. There's two camps. He says in Matthew 25, 1 and 2, he says, there was parable of the 10 virgins. 5 of them were wise, 5 of them were foolish. Now he's like, look, Jesus is now creating, how do you be polarizing? One of the ways is to create an us versus them, or a two camps kind of story. You're telling a parable that is us and them. So it's like, whenever you read the parable of the 10 virgins, how many people read those parables and they're like, yeah, I want to be the foolish virgins. I want to be the foolish virgins who slept and ran out of oil and were knocking on the door, and Jesus says, depart from me, I know you not. It's like, who are you? And I want to be I want to be the foolish virgins. Said no one ever. So when you listen to the parable, you're like, I want to be the wise. Like, how can I be the wise? What can I do to be the wise? And then Jesus identified, this is what the wise do. The wise trim their lamps. The wise take oil, and the oil is the Holy Spirit. It's a connection. The wise are prepared. So what you're doing, you're giving two identities. Then you can describe how is this identity, and you describe the behavior that you want your dream who to take, or that your dream who already identifies as wise, and you're like, this is what wise people do, and this is what foolish people do. And then they're like, I don't want to be foolish, so let me be wise. And then they do that. It's a form of persuasion. See, Jesus' parables were polarizing. Does that make sense? So Jesus preached polarizing parables, and you should too. Learn lessons from the great master of persuasion, the great master of education and teaching. So these polarizing parables create two classes. Don't be afraid to throw rocks at the enemy, to have an enemy, to identify an enemy, And there is very few things in this life that is able to unite a group of people as a shared common enemy. By having a common enemy for several years, like our enemy was like, we're going to war against living aimless lives. We are going to war against, it could be an ideology, it could be a competitor in your field, it could be some false belief. Like you see that Jesus constantly talks about an adversary or devil. The devil, the adversary. The word devil means adversary. Satan means enemy. So all this talk about Satan and the Savior is all this polarizing. It's having an enemy that unites Christ's followers, that were united against this common thing. So in our context, like I realize that one of the ways that we do that is realizing that one of the enemies that we intentionally throw rocks at is what I call a poverty mindset. It's scarcity statements. It's just this belief that there's not enough. I believe in the law of infinite abundance. And infinite abundance means that there is more than enough for everybody to have more than enough, and there will still be more than enough. I believe that with money, with influence, with connection, with people, with time, with different things, that there is more than enough to go around. Where a common belief is like, oh no, if I make more money, then I'm going to have to steal from other people. Or by me succeeding, I'm actually taking opportunities for others to provide for them. And so as long as someone believes that my success threatens the success of others, what are they not going to want to do? Succeed. So I'm polarizing the audience when I'm like, look, there is enough. Your success, you obtaining wealth, actually creates opportunities for other people to succeed more than if you didn't. And this is a polarizing statement. This is what's creating two different people. And it's attracting those who you want, those who want to succeed. I believe, here's another polarizing statement, a belief. I believe that everything God created, He created to succeed, including you. Joshua 1:8, he says, when this book of the law, when the word of God is a meditation of your mind, the movement of your muscle, and the message of your mouth, then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. The Bible says that God wants you to have success. It's based on the principles of the Word of God. Now, there are poverty preachers who love speaking about how they love to compare success with this, like, they like to contrast, they like to polarize that, like, poverty and piety. They're like two different things. Like they want to, they like subconsciously teach business is bad, poverty is piety, wealth is wickedness, that it's like you can have all the wealth or you can have Jesus. But I'm like, wait a second, why can't you do both? There's a lot of wealthy people who followed Christ. Look at Job. He wouldn't qualify for food stamps. Look at the wisest and wealthiest man that ever lived on planet Earth. King Solomon did so by following the principles in the Word of God. So if we follow the principles of Proverbs, you think we might learn a little thing or two about creating wealth. Yes, many times in the Proverbs of Solomon, this is another concept. He shared polarizing proverbs. Solomon shared polarizing proverbs. You could write that down. And many times in the scriptures, Solomon contrasts, this is the rich have a diligent, like they're diligent, but the poor are slothful. He contrasts he says, go to the ants, thou sluggard, and be wise, consider her ways. And so it's like the ant and the slug, the ant and the sloth. So you have the diligent and you have the lazy. And he says that the sluggard is going to lead to poverty. But the diligent hand shall be made fat or have abundance. So he's constantly showing the richest and wisest man that ever lived on the earth. He's constantly showing you these are the practices that produce poverty, and these are the practices that produce prosperity. And he's showing you the contrast between here's a poor, here's a wealthy. Like, you could do the same thing in your messages, whether that's in health, whether it's in relationships, or whether it's in finances, wherever you are. Like another example you can contrast people is when teaching people, it's like in entrepreneurship, like, you don't want to work for money. Like, working for money is one of the worst things that you work for. I don't work for money. I work for relationships. I work for skills. I work for experiences. But I work for growth, but I don't work for money. We have our money to work for us and provide for us so that we can do the work that we're called to do. And where then you polarize and you say, okay, well, poor people, they work for a salary. As long as you are trading time for money, you're going to be limited. Time is limited. And if you connect your income generation to a limited resource as your time, you will always be limited. There's only so many hours in a day. So poor people work for a salary. The middle class work for stuff. And the wealthy work for skills. So when you work in your business, work for skills, work for the development of your talents, and you will gain. And high income skills are better than a high income job. You see the polarization? That it's better to have high income skills and to work towards those skills, like sales, like communication, like crafting a compelling character. That's a high income skill. And learning to speak, using your mouth and your mind to make money. These are high income skills, while a high income job, that could easily be taken away. That is like, it's here today, gone tomorrow. If you break your leg, you're not able to go to your job. You can be making $70 an hour, but if you break your leg, you are at a disadvantage and your family is in great risk as long as your high income job is the only source of income that you have. It's important to have something that's able to make money for you while you sleep and to start developing something like that. You see that this is polarizing. It's creating two classes of people. Some people have a high income job. They're like, I want high income skills. Some people have a high income job. They're like, I don't want high income skills. It's like, why would I want skills when I got this job? And it's like, okay, well, those people can go somewhere else. Like, I'm probably not going to be the best to share with them because I teach about high income skills. I teach about how to develop your skills in a way that you could serve God and serve people and make a lot of money. It's like, that's not, they're probably not the best people to serve for me, but there's other people who can. So you can think about what are the polarizing statements. And sometimes, like, you might have this temptation to be like, well, if I start polarizing, like, what if that limits like, how could I speak polarizing statements without limiting the people I talk to? It's like, you can't. That's why you want to be polarizing. So you do limit the people you talk to. And it's better to have 1,000 true fans who are ravenous, are eager to buy whatever you want, buy whatever you have to offer, or ascend and work with you. It's better to have 1,000 people who are fully engaged than to have 50,000 people who are just mildly just coming by or haggling or creating all these, like, just not interested in. They're not buying for you. There's a lot of people watching your stuff, but nobody's interested in buying your stuff. If you can't sell them, then you won't be able to serve them. Because the transformations in the transaction, when they say yes and they exchange, then it opens the doors for you to have the resources to give to them the value and solve the problems that you are called to solve. So it's better to polarize and have fewer than to try to go wide and be all things to all people. Because here's what happens. When you try to be all things to all people, you end up being nothing to no one. Anything that is for everybody is also for nobody. Because if they're unclear on who you're speaking to, they can't raise their hand. They can't say, like, yes, I agree. It doesn't work like that. Another area that I polarize people is by saying, like, I believe that ministry and business are not two separate things. They're one. That your business is your God-given assignments in the marketplace, that God has given gifts to his people and talents, and he expects to use those talents to exchange in the marketplace. And through your business, you have a contact with a class of people you otherwise couldn't access. So I believe that business is God's vehicle to serve Christ. As Romans 12:11 says, I believe business is God's vehicle to sell your talents. And this is polarizing. Not everybody believes that, but that's fine. People who want to compartmentalize Christ and their business and say those are two separate things, then it's like, well, they're probably not going to like hearing from me because I talk a lot about Christ in commerce. I talk a lot about business and the Bible. And some people are like, whoa, this is jarring, this is different. But it's like, that's okay. Others are like, I've never heard this, but that's what I believe. Like, I felt that way, but I've never expressed it. I mean, I had a Jay, he's a lawyer, and him and his wife, like, they're entrepreneurs at their core. They've gone through what I did. And Jay, here's some of the training. It's like the business principles from the Bible. He's like, this is incredible. This is powerful. People would pay thousands of dollars to listen to the training that Enoch is providing here. And they don't even, people don't realize the value that's being shared in these videos. And he's like, I grew up in a community that the people who are closest to God are the ones who are having the less and less finances. They're more poor, and they're glamorizing poverty. And but then in business and entrepreneurship, it's like, I see that this is a way to impact and use my talents. And he's just like trying to make sense of this. But now he's connecting. He's like, yes, I've always believed that business and ministry, like Jesus said, wist ye not I must be about my Father's business? And now he's like, someone is vocalizing publicly into words that which I feel and express. And it's like, boom, that's someone that we could really help. So he watches the videos, he shares it with other people. He's excited compared to if someone's like, hey, why are you talking about business and Bible? It's like, oh, well, I kind of think that business is good, but if you don't, then it's like, well, you don't have to either. And it's like, then you'll attract no one. If you don't take a stand, what do you take a stand for? What are you passionate about? And be passionate, be authentic, be yourself. And you will attract people who share similar values, and they will be 10 times more committed to your cause than if you just try to be all things to everybody. They won't even know where you stand. They won't even know how to agree with you because you're trying to agree to like all people at all times, and it doesn't work. So what I would recommend is, in short, as you're polarizing, the ways that you do that is you present polarizing parables. The polarizing parables is when you create two classes of people. You have the rich and the poor. You have the wise and the foolish. You have the faithful and the unfaithful. You have in relationships. You have the healthy or the sick in health, depending on what market you're in. You just polarize and identify behaviors that you want your audience to take, that they're going to be like, whoa, I want to be healthy, so let me go do these behaviors. And then you create polarization by having a common enemy. And as you throw rocks at the enemy, as you go to war against a cause, an ideology, a belief, or something, then you will unite people. They're like, yes, and then start an army of affiliates, an army of people who are ready to go to battle in taking this message to move the masses. You will have some committed people who want to share your resources with other people and say, have you heard? You've got to check this out. And as you share your beliefs, let them polarize. Jesus was not afraid to create two classes of people. And as you do this, you will have more influence with the few you're called to serve, and even the people who disagree with you, they're still going to watch your stuff. And if they're watching your stuff, if they're commenting disagreements, if they're commenting like they don't like that, Jesus said, or Paul said, you can't do anything against the truth but for it. That all of their comments actually increases that engagement, increases your content in the algorithms, where you're able to reach more people. There's literally nothing that they could do against the truth, and it only helps it to spread more. But if you're boring, then boring businesses go bankrupt. That's not what actually serves people. It's not your content that's going to keep people along with you for 10, 20, 30 years. It's your personality. It's you. People are buying from you. You are what makes your programs valuable. Your messages have preference. So as you're crafting your compelling character, create a pouch of parables, just an inventory of stories, personal stories that you can share to teach and illustrate the principles that you have to share, and start mastering the skill of storytelling. Storytelling is a high income skill because it changes people's emotions, it changes people's characters, it changes people's behavior, it changes people's beliefs, and then they're able to buy what you have to offer. and to do the decision that you know is going to be in their best interest, that they actually want to for their reasons. And your personal testimony helps people to relate to you as an individual. When you follow these 4 things, it will change the way that you show up, and you will be able to have friends, fans, followers for a lifetime. And you'll be able to serve people, and you don't have to be just here one day like a shooting star and then gone the next. But you could be here and build a brand that outlasts. You could show up and serve Christ in the marketplace for a very long time. I'm so excited that you guys were able to join, and thank you for the time. I look forward to serving you guys soon. One thing I want to share is if you're interested in knowing more about how you can get started in building your evangelistic business or being able to use your business as a vehicle for service, then I encourage you to join us for the Evangelistic Business Challenge. We're sharing some things in there that isn't found anywhere else, and it is so clear, so helpful. And we're going to be talking about the 4 ways to grow a business, unlike we've ever done before. There is unique things there that I would highly encourage you to join us. If you're interested, go to evangelisticbusinesschallenge.com. There you can ask whatever questions that you want about anything that we talk about, and how you can grow your evangelistic business. Thank you so much for watching, friends, and remember, God doesn't call a qualified, He qualifies a called. Sure.